Okay, the idea that the 2021 BSides Huntsville gets started 1 minute early is very exciting to me. So, Nick, would you please introduce Joanna and let's get this party started.
All right. So I just want to really quick say, I know there were questions in chat about BSides, so I think everybody kind of knows now what BSides is, but Huntsville BSides started about I think this is our 6th year by a group of us in Huntsville, and it has actually flourished since then. So we're so happy we have BSides in Huntsville. All right, let's do this again. I want to introduce our first keynote. Joanna Burkey is the Chief Information Officer, Security Officer at HP. In this role, Joanna and her team have responsibility for HP's global cybersecurity program, including IT infrastructure, technology, platforms, and business units. Our organization has responsibility for identity, governance, compliance, security operations, strategy, and architecture, as well as product security. Joanna returned to HP in April 2020 after several years with Siemens AG, where she was most recently the global head for cyber defense responsible for cybersecurity defense across IT, OT, infrastructure, as well as products, solutions, and services. Joanna has a computer science mathematics background from the University of Texas at Austin and Angelo State University. She has focused on cybersecurity throughout her career. Her previous roles have included software engineering, product strategy, and security evangelism. Joanna is based in Austin, Texas. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, David. David has done amazing coordination. There's a couple of external conference type events I have been a part of since the pandemic, and I have to say he's done amazing. So I think all of us are really lucky to have the chance to be a part of this. And I appreciate so much that I have this chance to spend with you all. I wish I could be there. I'm missing having food from another part of the country, and especially food that I don't make myself. But of course, I would, draw number one would be able to hang out with all of you. So in lieu of that, I wanted to have a conversation this morning. I know it's called a keynote, and like anybody, I have a lot to say, but I also want it to be conversational. I think a couple of people are going to be keeping an eye on the chat, and if there's questions to bring up while I talk, I absolutely welcome those. And especially interested if there's certain things you'd like for me to dive in deeper on or not as we chat, more than welcome. And I'll go join the talk Q&A when we're done here if there's anything that you want to keep going after 10 o'clock this morning. So you'll see I've thrown a couple of slides up here because I think in the virtual world, it's kind of nice to have something to look at that's not my face. But I don't really love slides. So, they're only there as a little bit of an assist. Mostly what I'd like to chat about with you all today is going to be all in the talk track. And what is it that we're talking about? It's a little bit about the evolution of cybersecurity. It's a little bit about what and why are some of the changes we've seen in the last year. But more importantly, what does it mean to us? Where are we going, and what are some of the best practices on us as the practitioners and as the technicians with the scale and scope of what we're dealing with today? Interesting thing I've observed in the last year, number one, is all of us in here, in this room, whether it's there in a big room in Huntsville or it's here in this virtual room, we know already cybersecurity is a fascinating technical domain. I mean, that's why we work in it. And whether you got into it on purpose, you started playing around when you were really young, you started playing around as you got older, or you fell into it, most of us here tend technical. And we got into it and we stuck with it because we love those technical parts of the subject. Whether it gets a ton of public attention or whether it gets nothing, or whether the president of the US talks about it or not, or what does his administration do? We're here because it's a cool topic and because it's fun, right? My own origin story is pretty basic, really, a little bit boring when it comes to people in cyber. I was a software engineer. I studied computer science. I loved it. I got hooked on assembly language My university taught IBM 360, 370 assembler as our assembly language basics. We had to take 2 semesters of it, and I fell in love. The ability to actually move things around at a bit level was one of the neatest things I had ever been exposed to in my life. When I was in college, long enough ago, unless you were in the military, cyber wasn't really a thing. So I'm one of those people who got out of college with a CS degree. I started programming for a living. And in the startup boom of the late 90s, I fell into security. I started working as an embedded programmer for a network security product, and it was awesome. I loved it. Been in the field ever since. So no matter how you get into it, most of us here already know how cool it is. As the topic has increased in importance, though, the fact that most people not in the field only look at it as a technical domain is starting to hold us back in the enterprise world. For many years, there's been this mindset in the boardroom and in the executive suite of, cybersecurity is just this interesting part of IT. Throw enough engineers at it, we're good. Oh, I have a cyber problem? Throw some more engineers at it, we're good, right? Technical domain, throw enough expertise at it, all is bueno. It's not good enough, and it's not enough anymore. But how do we, as the people in that domain, pivot along with this change in the language now? Because there has been a change in the language. Looking at regular media, looking at non-technical publications, listening to the news, listening to the things that the people running the companies listen to, you hear all these ways in the last couple of years that cybersecurity is referred to. It's referred to as a boardroom issue. It's referred to as a business enabler. It's referred to as chief concern of the CEO, chief concern of the CIO, chief concern of the chief risk officer, chief concern of the C whatever letter of the day officer. And sitting here in the field, you kind of look around and you go, what does that mean? I mean, does that even matter? Does it really change anything that it's being talked about in all these ways? I'm here today after enough years in this field, technical, non-technical management. I absolutely can say, and I am convinced, we cannot and should not run a cybersecurity organization today the way that we did 10 years ago, the way we did 5 years ago, the way even really that we did 2 years ago. But it's not because of those things that people say. It really has to do, oh, I'm sitting here playing with PowerPoint and it's not wanting to cooperate. There we go. Oh, a big blue screen, not the bad kind. There are forcing functions that are forcing a change in this language. And these are not inconsiderable. These are not the smallest concerns. These are big things. A couple of them to highlight. None of these are going to be news to anyone in here. One is the commercialization of the attack tool chain. We know, we've seen it. The attackers are getting better at utilizing each other, at developing their own supply chains, for lack of a better word, at commoditizing the tools. Okay. We've seen the evolution in the regulatory and the compliance space. That part, admittedly, a little bit boring. The policy part of cybersecurity has never been one that lights my fire, but it is a super critical one. And we start to look at the really serious money that's getting thrown around in fines, in non-compliance penalties, in violations. This ever-increasing complexity of the regulatory landscape is a really significant lever on the topic of cyber today. And very importantly, a growing awareness and a growing savviness in the consuming base. Whether your consumer is someone who buys your product, or whether your customer is someone in your own company, or your customer is a fellow student at the school that you are in, people who aren't involved in cyber are constantly learning more, they're demanding more, and they're starting to ask questions that they didn't ask even as recently as several months ago. Now, all of these things are important. They are not by far the smallest reasons that we're changing how we approach running cybersecurity. However, I think there are two really compelling reasons that are not in those three buckets we just mentioned. The first one is digitalization. And there are so many different definitions to what this word means. To me, it means the explosion of data and the new technologies we have to transport data. In other words, it is 5G, it's IoT, and it is the focus of the world on data and all the different ways data can be pulled, can be collected, can be used, can be misused, can be exploited, can be violated, can even be used for good, whatever those are. I hope we find them at some point. All of these things, in my opinion, are what's really forcing this change in cyber having to insinuate itself in so many different parts of the world that it never has before. This, coupled with the democratization of technology. I love that phrase. I did not come up with it. I stole it. I stole it with pride. The democratization of technology, to me, as a practitioner, means how much easier it is now for people to bypass cybersecurity. If they don't want to, they don't have to engage with you as much anymore as they used to. And when I talk about they right now, it's absolutely employees of the enterprises that I've been a part of. But that's only my view on who I'm talking about here. When we think a little bit about technology, especially technology out in the business world, out in the corporate world, out in the educational field, for about 15 to 20 years, IT departments had a great stranglehold on technology. They pretty much were able to manage and rule most of the world. You wanted something, you generally had to go through IT. They might say yes, they might say no, but they were able to sit around with the crown and the scepter and pretty much rule what the technology landscape in your part of the world looked like. It is easier than ever now, though, to bypass IT. IT is no longer in that seat. With the advent of the cloud, with the advent of easily accessible, really foundational pieces like GitHub. I mean, 15 years ago, the idea that you would have a bunch of source code floating around in the public domain was crazy. This was not on the radar of people. But now technology is accessible to anybody. An employee with a corporate credit card can go online, get what they want, do what they want. IT never has to know about it. And by extension, the old type of cybersecurity organization never had to know about it. It is easier than ever for people to bypass cyber unless they have a reason to work with us. So you can easily say, all right, we need to get tougher. We need to get better visibility. We need to get better detection, and we need to get tougher that people do what we tell them to do, right? No, I don't think that is the right answer. And we're going to get back to that in a minute, back into the why. So the question to me, and what I wanted to dive in a little bit with you all on, is how are we pivoting the organizations of cybersecurity now to meet this call? And the short answer is kind of all the ways. We're pivoting in all the ways. You name it, it's different, right? To me, as a leader in the space, it decomposes into four really significant areas, and it's all about the how. Those three things I mentioned at the beginning: commoditization of the attack chain, the regulatory landscape, the growing savviness of your consumer base. Those things all influence what we do. But digitalization and the democratization of technology influence how we do it. And that, to me, is where it really gets interesting, is the how. Because if you get the how done right, wherever you are, that's when you can really make the impact at scale. I believe it chiefly influences how we talk about cybersecurity, how we define and work within our scope, how we work with the business, and how we lead. How we lead has so many different connotations to it, and I could probably spend a 5-hour keynote on that. I will spare you that. I will not, but I save that one to the last because it is my favorite one. So a little bit about these. And I'd like to ask real quick, because I'm not paying attention to the chat. David or anyone, has anything come up in the chat that you want to tell me as we're going through this?
No, people are listening, maybe making question notes to themselves, and I'll just take this opportunity to encourage them to throw it in there. If you have a question, get it ready for now. And if something comes up, check in again. I'll let you know what they're asking.
Fabulous. Sounds good. So having been, and I know in this virtual room today, we span a lot of lengths of experience. I realized recently I'm approaching about 25 years in this space, which is a little crazy to me, not the least on what it says about my age. But I have seen so many changes in how the organizations operate during that time. I've not spent the majority of my career on the practitioner side. I've actually spent the majority of my career on the product and on the engineering side. I loved doing that. But of course, you're always, seeing how the practitioners are running cybersecurity wherever you are, whether it's work or school or even your hobbies. The how it's been done has changed so much. 15 years ago, when IT had that control over the technology that they did, it was really enough. It was sufficient to hire super smart people who love the topic of cyber, stick them in a basement, throw flat food under the door, and let them protect the infrastructure. It was enough. It was not a bad approach. It is not enough today. What we do outward facing now, wherever we are, is as important as what we do inward facing. And by the inward facing, I mean the actual operational and technical work. It is the forensics we do. It's the security operations we do. It's everything we do. That's what I call inward facing. This outward facing stuff, it seems like this is not the fun part of what we do. What is fun about going out and talking to the business when I could be reversing a piece of malware? But it's so critical now because it's that outward facing part that is enabling us to do the inward at the degree that we need. We need so much more to do it well. We need more collaboration. We need more resources. We need, maybe I'm not going to say more tools. We might need different tools. But what we need to do that job inside constantly changes. And if you don't take care of the outside, you ain't going to have what you need inside. So what are some of these best practices to keep in mind? The first one I mentioned is how we talk about cyber. I mentioned at the beginning, it has been seen and still is in a large way as a technology domain. That's why we got into it, because we're technologists and it's cool. But that's enough for us. It's not enough for the rest of the world. When I say how we talk about cyber, it really comes down to one thing: the so what. Years ago, when my primary job was two hats, I was running a security research organization and I was doing security evangelism, which is this really weird phrase that kind of means everything. You need to talk to salespeople to enable them. You need to go talk to customers on the road. You need to go speak at conferences. You need to do all of this talking to get people capiche with what's going on with cyber. And I remember one day really clearly, I was giving a presentation to a group of salespeople about our product and the features we'd added to it. And there is one guy in there, and I finished my little spiel and I thought I had done a great job. I was like, yes, I've articulated this in terms that salespeople can understand. I got it down. I'll take a few questions and then I'm going to go have a beer. And this guy sticks his hand up. He's like, so what? And I'm kind of like, what do you mean, so what? So what about what? And he's like, so what? You just said all this stuff to me. What's the so what? And I said, well, the so what is the product is better at securing the customer. And he's like, so what? What does it mean? And honestly, y'all, at that time, and for probably about 2 to 3 years later, I just thought the dude was a jerk, and I'm like, oh, that's the so what guy. And someone would mention him to me. I'm like, oh yeah, the so what guy. He probably could have done it in a little different way, but the point he was making was so spot on. And I realized it once I started to see how CISOs were talking to boards of directors, how CISOs were talking to their peers, how people in the org were talking to people not in cyber. People that don't get it need to understand, so what? What are you telling me this for? What does it mean to me? I, as a CISO, can roll into the board of directors, and I've seen people do this so many times, and they go, all right, everybody, we have 287 unpatched Red Hat servers in our environment. And to them, they're like, I just said it. I just said the so what? And everyone sitting around the table is like, so what? Is that good? Is that bad? Does 287 put us in like top quartile, or does 287 mean like we're going to be target tomorrow? I mean, what do you mean? And it has taken us years to really clue into the fact that what seems meaningful to us is not always what's meaningful to our audience. People talk about metrics that matter. Oh, it's alliterative, it rolls off the tongue, it's lovely. Metrics that matter. Metrics that matter are hugely important, because if someone doesn't understand the impact of what you're saying, they don't give a you-know-what about what you say. Audience-driven communication is huge in this space. How we define our scope. So in the old days, when the cyber team took flat food and was able to sit around and not be bothered by people from the business knocking on their door all day, the scope was relatively straightforward. It was the infrastructure. It is so hard now to find these bright lines, especially if you're with a company who's delivering services to customers, or you're at a startup, you're able to design your infrastructure greenfield and you've gone cloud first, or your school hasn't quite clued into where these bright lines need to be and they probably don't have the money to enforce them anyway. You cannot clearly distinguish as well any longer product from services, from infrastructure. The CISO and the CISO's org can no longer sit around and go, oh, infrastructure is our problem. Other stuff, that's your problem. Because who gets the finger pointed at them, not that other finger, but sometimes you get that too, pointed at you when there's a problem? You're wearing the hat. They go, hey, you're cyber. You know more about cyber than anyone else around here. This is your deal. And you're sitting around going, hey, I've only been focusing on infrastructure. I don't know what you're talking about. We have to figure out what they're talking about, because if we don't figure out these accountability chains and we don't figure out who does what and where and how to make it secure, it ain't going to be anybody else. We are the experts. And that's an exciting thing to me, because would you trust anybody more to figure it out than yourself? You're the one who has the knowledge. You know more about cyber than the non-cyber people around you. Of course, we're the right people to figure it out, but we need to do it. We need to make that mindset to acknowledge, oh, wow, okay, this is a gap to be filled. I'm going to have to grab that bull by the horns. And I'm going to have to realize it's not a one and done thing. This is not a one and done. Oh, I changed my scope. I talk about it differently. Hallelujah. We're going to move on. I'm finally going to get that beer. It's going to constantly be changing. Acknowledge it. Make that part of your scope as well. Part of your scope is a constantly changing scope. Hooray. But that's what keeps it interesting, right? We're here because we don't like to be bored. Well, you ain't going to be bored. How we work with the business. This is one that can really alienate people. And I would lay a couple of dollars out there that some of you in the audience are like, I don't want to work with a business. This is why I got into a technical field. And David, I don't know why you got a keynote speaker in here who's talking about business, because if I want to talk about business, I'd go to an MBA conference. I wouldn't come to BSides. I'm sympathetic to that. I don't, this is not a part of the job that I am gravitating to. If I gravitated to business, I'd have gone to MBA school as well, right? But we can't go without it. It's not optional any longer if you're in cyber, unless you have a really privileged position of being able to isolate yourself. Maybe you write books for a living. That'd be cool. You can carve out maybe a couple places in the world where you don't have to engage with a business. Those are few and far between, and they're getting smaller. Going back earlier to that democratization of technology and what we do outward facing, productive engagements with the business will allow our success. If our success is the securing of the enterprise we're in, or the greater protection of wherever we sit, or the accomplishment of this goal, productive business engagement will be what gets us there when we figure out how to do it right. And I don't think it's that challenging. You don't need to go back to business school and learn how to talk like a financial analyst. You don't have to meet the GM of a business on his own terms. What you do need to do is to be able to meet them a little bit over halfway by acknowledging your common goals. Somewhere, somehow, there will be common goals. It may seem like a massive polarity that's unsolvable. They want to get a product out fast. You did a pen test on the product and you're like, there ain't no way we can put this thing out in public. Are you kidding me? We will get slaughtered. That doesn't seem like a solvable polarity. They want to get it out. You want to make it secure. It's going to take some time and money. There is a common goal there. The common goal there is, though, they need that product to succeed once it is out in the field. They don't get to just retire the day they ship the product and run off to Maui, right? So finding and highlighting those common goals and expressing to them the desire that you do want them to meet their goal. You want to meet that goal because ultimately that's your goal too. You don't want to be part of a company that puts crap out there in the field that can be popped at the drop of a hat, right? We have to keep that eye on the prize, talk with them in those ways, and recognize they don't work in absolutes. We sometimes can tend to work in absolutes. You know, you're attacking a product, you want to find the vulnerabilities. You're either going to find something there or you're not. That's kind of absolute, right? Businesses don't work in absolutes. One of the easiest ways that we've seen this manifest in the last years is there used to be this idea that the cybersecurity strategy was a lift and shift. No matter where you are, look at the NIST framework, get your unpatched system numbers down, get your product vulnerabilities down, boom, check, we're good. That idea of a universal cybersecurity strategy is a total myth. And the reason it is a myth is that there are not only three, but three that I really like to think about. You know, they're good enough to get minimum viable product there. There's three legs to that tripod that determine what your right strategy is wherever you are. And I'm going to talk about this in business and enterprise terms, but I think these ideas apply no matter where you are. The first idea is, what's the strategy of your business? Are you in a business that is rapidly and exponentially growing in a new field? Are you in a business that's going through a transformation? Are you in a business that just wants to run and maintain? Or maybe even in a business that's spinning down so that they can spin something up? All of those things matter. They matter on their own, and they also matter because they affect the risk appetite. This is one of the biggest things that impacts your cybersecurity strategy. What is the risk appetite of the business around you? You know, the textbook example here is, let's compare Coke to Uber to State Farm insurance, right? The amount of risk these companies are willing to take is vastly different in vastly different ways. And that risk is really closely tied to and often comes out of, what is the core value of that business? What makes that business it? What makes you you? You know, for Coke, it's the recipe, right? If everybody was able to make Coke, why are they special? But there's no recipe at Uber. I mean, you know, yeah, there may be some cool algorithms in their technology, but they haven't made a business around a recipe that can't be duplicated. They made a business around other concepts. You look at a company like State Farm. What makes them them? Stability. You don't want an insurance company that's a fly-by-night, right? All of these core values are incredibly different from each other. So if your job is to make those enterprises and those efforts more secure, you're going to have incredibly different frameworks to do that. The securing and protection of a super special soft drink recipe is going to be really different than protecting massive financial assets in a company like State Farm, right? So acknowledging that there really aren't absolutes in this business world and figuring out what that means to us in a world where there often are absolutes is really challenging, but one of the biggest ways that we can start to have this partnership with the business and not have it like this empire, right? And speaking of that empire, I think of the empire, it's kind of like being the traffic cop or being the Dr. No. And I noticed something here in the chat about being the Dr. No. It is an art. It is absolutely an art to walk that line between we want to be partners, we want to be enablers, but at some point you do have to say, you can't do that. At some point you do have to look at metrics. I mean, I see phishing campaigns targeted in here. Users hate that. Yes, they do. So the answer is, we just don't do them because we want to be friendly. We want to be partners. This is the art. The art is that balance. And I will give all of you an example I ran into really recently where it was that balance between not being the Dr. No, but not being okay with something that a part of the business really wanted to do. I'm in a company right now going through a transformation. It's no surprise. You look at HP's press releases, you listen to our CEO speak in his quarterly analyst calls. We're going through a transformation. It's, by the way, it's super fun. It is really exciting to be in cyber when your own business is changing faster than you can keep up with it. As you can imagine, there are a ton of efforts going on here and there. People have their corporate credit cards. People can go to procurement. They can buy things. They can execute things. And if you're lucky, you know about it and you're able to have a little bit of influence on it. One came to light recently where there was a large amount of really critical SAP data that a part of the business wanted to put in a vendor's cloud, fully in the vendor's cloud. I'm okay with that for some forms of data, and I'm okay with that for some forms of cloud. This particular data and this particular vendor, no, I didn't think it was a good idea. So the conversation we had was not Joanna rolls into the meeting and says, no, 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 no. I gotta go, guys. What's next? Bye. See you later. The conversation we had in the meeting was me saying, I am extremely uncomfortable with this, and I'm going to tell you why. And I illustrated for them what I had seen happen at another enterprise. When the vendor was not able to prove good enough security practice, when the criticality of the data was important enough, and when I gave that illustration, the discussion in the meeting changed from, let's convince Joanna to say yes rather than no. The discussion in the meeting changed to, is this more risk than fits HP at this time? And the answer was yes, yes, this doesn't fit who we want to be. This doesn't fit who we're trying to be. This doesn't fit who we want to be. So let's talk about other options. You will find yourself having so many of those conversations. If you get into a part of cyber where you are face to face with the business, and not all you have to be, you'll have that conversation multiple times a day, where you don't just say no and walk out the door. You explain the why. You explain the why. That helps more than anything get people to the table and recognize, okay, they're not trying to be difficult. So let's talk about how we get where we want to be in a way that we can all get behind. And you will sometimes still come down to the person who says, I get it. I understand what you're telling me. I understand the risk, but I eat risk for breakfast. And you know what? That's when you go to their boss. And if they're the CEO and their boss CEO and CEO goes, I ate risk for breakfast, you've done your job. You've done your job. You brought visibility to it. You shouted from the rooftops. And that's what we're here for, is to do our best, right? A word here that's really fraught is governance. That word makes people like, governance, don't tell me what to do. But a huge part, I mean, I think it's even in my bio, it's a huge part of what my organization does is define and execute on governance. That part is the art. It's figuring out governance in a way that you can bring people along with you and not just create an environment where you can't look away because then they're going to go run off and do something bad. Earlier in the introduction, when we talked about, you know, it's just enough to get tougher, right? And I said, no. I do not believe getting tougher and getting more restrictive is the answer, simply because if you rule with the hammer, you can't ever take the hammer away. And if you rule by putting your thumb down, you can't ever remove your thumb. So with the problem getting broader, with the problem getting more complex, if you can't exponentially sprout enough thumbs to keep up with the breadth of the problem, to keep up with 5G, to keep up with IoT, you got to find another way. So the fact that I don't believe in ruling with the hammer and I don't believe in the empire, it's not just because of my personality that I'm like, you know, kumbaya, Girl Scout, everybody get along. It's mathematics. If you can't scale enough to rule with the empire, you got to find another way. To me, it's as simple as that. And that feeds into how we lead. And, you know, you may go, it's easy for you to talk about leading. You're sitting there as a CISO. We're all leading in some form or fashion. And I really don't want to, you know, be the pithy, we're all a leader no matter where we are. No, the reality is by being in such a cool area, by knowing what you know, by having people come to you and ask you questions, look at you as an expert, you're leading by definition. There are so many facets to that leadership. I'm really only going to mention two today because they're two that I think are really critical because they're the ones that influence the future. You lead by how you grow and hire, and you lead by how you structure. I'm really, really interested these days in this idea of how we grow the cyber tent. We need to figure out how to make the tent bigger, more inclusive. Not only because we have a talent gap, not only because we have a people gap, I think we have a gap in how we think about everything we need to do. Nobody will argue at the importance of having critical technical roles in cyber. That's obvious, been around forever. Still, when most of us, you know, think about, or people say, oh, what is the cyber professional? People like y'all, people like me, people who started as technologists. I would argue very strongly that that is not the only image of the cyber professional that we need to develop into. You cannot do without the technologists. You cannot do without people like us. But we cannot make up everything that you're hearing about today. We need people who can work on deal support with sales organizations. You need people who can assess and audit and not just, you know, check the box like, oh, here's my CMMI, here's my checkbox. Yeah, okay, we're good. No, people who can really go into the environment and think and look at complex setups, look at complex problems and draw conclusions. Financial and business analysts who can understand cyber, yet understand how the business works and therefore find exposures, find gaps, and more importantly, find solutions, right? You need the politicians. I mean, politicians, really? But yeah, I mean, a lot of what I've talked about today is, you know, not politician in this really nasty idea of we're going through a horrible time as a country, a politician in the old sense, like a statesman who can bring different parties to the table and find that common ground. That is an important part of what we do. It's easy to make fun of it. It's easy to go, God, I don't want to do that. But it's really critical to what we need in order to enable us, right? We also need techies that have zero cyber skills. You know, we're really actively these days in my org, we're looking for cloud experts, DevOps specialists, people who they haven't ever had any cyber training, but they've got a mass of other skills. We can teach cyber. We all learned it at some point, right? So we need techies who don't fit the traditional mold either. The great news is this is an ideal time to intersect all these needs with also underserved populations. And by underserved population, that can mean anything. It can mean non-traditionally degreed. It can mean people in the latter part of their career who never thought about cyber before, but now they need another opportunity. It can mean people who lost their job and need reskilling. It can mean minority populations who haven't gotten this enablement and this focus before. There's a lot of talent out in the world that isn't getting attention because it doesn't fit the traditional mold. And that's a great marriage for a field that's blowing up with need, like cyber, and an area where there are people, we just need to find them. This is a marriage made in heaven. That's the whole part about the growing. Obviously I get really excited about this stuff. The growing for the future. This is a massive part of what excites me and makes me happy as a leader. I also want to talk a little bit about structuring. Most organizations still have a command and control structure. You have a hierarchy, you have a command, and that's how it works. There is a great idea that it's been around for a while, especially in the military. And General Stanley McChrystal wrote a book about it several years ago called Team of Teams. General McChrystal headed up the US Armed Forces for several years in Afghanistan. I think around the first Gulf War, I'm not certain about that, but during that period of time. And that is where he noticed the traditional CNC mode of rule and command in the military was not working against the insurgents because they were working in independent networks. They were working in self-forming pods. They were using non-traditional methods of communication. They had leapfrogged the US military command structure in how they worked, and they were whipping the US's butts. And he recognized we can't take the command and control structure and combat this. We have to change what we do. So what he ended up doing and what he wrote the book about is this idea called the team of teams. And the team of teams was, you don't have that traditional CNC structure. You have self-forming teams around certain topics, et cetera. So I was fortunate enough when during a couple of my years at Siemens to run an organization where we were able to structure this way. You kind of have to have the right org for it. And the org that I had was global, but we didn't do, only incident response was here, and then only forensics was here, and then only X is here. In all of our global locations, we did a little bit of everything. So it was a great place to formalize this team of teams idea. I learned a lot from it, what went well, what didn't go well. But what it taught me was we don't have to think in these traditional forms of structure in cyber. If you think about what we're doing in a lot of ways as a military engagement, because there are a lot of similarities there, we can take ideas from stuff like what General McChrystal has and use that to adapt to the situation we're in. I noticed something in the chat about when have we done kind of lateral non-cyber moves and it gone well and when it's gone awful. Oh yeah. So I can tell you about one right now that's going so well that I'm so happy with it. The organization that I run today, for many years, of course, like any CISO org, was very focused on the inside, focused on the infrastructure. We are really now trying to grow this ecosystem with developers across HP, specifically software development across HP. There's never been this holistic, unified ecosystem where it's not someone at the top ruling, but it's all of us bringing our skills and talents to the table. So several months ago, we had interest from a member of our print business unit. She'd been working with development organizations for a while as a project manager, really was interested in cyber, had taken the CISSP, put her hand up and said, I'd love to come to your org at some point. I don't really have the technical skill, but I love the topic. And hey, I know a hell of a lot about how HP works. So she came over. It's been amazing. She's driving several work streams right now that cyber is doing in collaboration with the development community at our enterprise. And that development community is about 9,000 people. So she gets out and she finds the stakeholders, she finds the people that can move the needle, she works on solutions. She comes back to the cyber org and says, hey, we need this, this, and this. The guys work to give it to her. It has been amazing. And it really demonstrates to me, she brought a ton of skills to the table. None of them were technical cyber skills, but what she brought to the table was exactly what we needed to advance that needle and to continue that shift left on the topic. Now, I've seen several that bomb, and a lot of them bomb because of ego. It's hard to admit when you don't know something. And it's easy to be intimidated when you move into a new area. And I've seen several people move into cyber and they want to establish how much they know. They want to establish, here's my value, here's what I can do. And they're not looking around enough to say, here's also what I need to learn. Those are the ones that go really, really poorly. So you really want to make sure that everyone across your org has that mindset. And I love what David mentioned earlier about the whole spirit of BSides. The spirit of BSides is that we all have something to learn from each other, and we do. And if you're finding people that know that and they operate that way, you will find people who can be successful in the field. So there's a lot of things we need to be. And I mean, I don't know what you guys think as we talk about it. I feel like I need to be all these things in front of you on a daily basis. And even though I made mental health expert and sounding board smaller in the font at the bottom, some days they are in writ large, right? It's the most important thing you can be on some days. And, you know, you look around and you're like, oh boy, that's a lot. And what isn't written in there is king of the empire or chief traffic cop. And some days you look around and you think, I'm just giving up more and more control. Maybe I should be the king of the empire. Maybe I should rule with the hammer. Maybe I should rule with the thumb. I am convinced after seeing it and trying it and not doing it, that's not the way to go. The way to make an impact at scale is to recognize you can't do it by being the king. You do it by finding the ecosystem, by pushing the ecosystem, enabling the ecosystem, recognizing all of these things that need to be brought to the table, recognizing that not a single human can do these things. And once you recognize that and you find what those parts of the ecosystem are, and the who and the where and the what and the wherefores, that's when we really make impact at scale these days. And I believe too, this is just the latest in the evolution of cyber. This is not our last evolution. Our field by the years is still really immature. Think about how long physical safety has been a thing, has been a focus. We're still figuring out what is cyber going to be? How do we continue to adapt to that constantly changing world? And I think the good news in there is, by nature of what we in here have done already, because we have people in here that in one way or another have already touched cyber. We've already learned, I think, what are the most critical skills here are. And I don't mean technical skills at all. I mean collaboration. We all have learned collaboration because we know the importance of intel sharing. We know the importance of putting a couple of brains together to uncover an attack chain. We know that you can't do it all alone in your own brain. Secondly, we have adaptability. You could never get through an incident or even get through the perpetration of one on your own without some adaptability. Nothing ever goes like it's planned, right? It's, I don't remember who said it, but the whole idea of military strategy, you've got a plan until the first bullet's fired, right? Or until you crest the first hill. By nature of what we do, whether it is on the white side or the black side, it has to be adaptable. You know, white hat, black hat, one in the middle, whatever. We have to adapt because it never goes like you script. And the third one is, I wrote down equanimity. And luckily it's in the morning. I haven't had a morning cocktail yet. I can say equanimity. But what I mean is the ability to not get too spun up, to treat things calmly. We deal with emergencies constantly. That over time creates the ability to take emergencies, to take fire drills, to deal with them, to deal with fire drills, to not get the hair on fire, to not get spun up. There's a lot of people in the communities you'll work with that don't have that skill. I think cyber teaches it. I'll never forget one time when I started to wonder, have I gotten too laissez-faire about cyber incidents? I was on a train platform in Germany. I'd been at some meetings in Nuremberg. I was waiting to go back to Munich to headquarters, and I get a call from a peer of mine. Oh my gosh, Joanna, someone is impersonating our CEO on WhatsApp. And my first thought was, okay, someone's spoofing the CEO on WhatsApp. Bummer. What are you so spun up about? And of course, his view, what he thought was happening, this is not a real cyber savvy guy. He is thinking, oh my gosh, in order to do this, someone had to take the CEO's phone. Someone, maybe they stole his SIM. Someone has pwned everything from the CEO. And of course, in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, someone put his name on an account. Whatevs, right? Big deal. And I remember that day, and of course it worked out where it hadn't been a big deal. Someone spoofed his name. And I was sitting on the train and I'm thinking, Joanna, have you gotten too whatevs about everything, right? Have you lost the ability to really get spun up when you need to? And the conclusion I came to is it's not ever productive to get in a panic. It's not ever productive to get spun up, especially when the people around you will do more than what is needed in that regard. This is something all of us, I believe, by nature of working in the field, we get that. We develop that calmness, and it's a great skill to have. So we've got these skills. We can make this difference at scale. I mean, I think it's an amazing time to be in the industry. There's so much we can do. We can, if you want to find a different place, you can find a different place. If you love what you do, you can keep doing what you do. It's only going to be in more demand. So I think it's good for us to kind of sit back, look at the evolution, recognize the evolution, think about what's needed, think about at the moment where you want to plug in to that and do it. And then look at and be excited by the impact that you're able to make. So I haven't looked at the chat in a few minutes. Let's see if there's anything else in there. I'm all ears and happy to move to the talk Q&A track when this is over as well.
Yeah, there have been some discussion and questions. I think Rita had one, and if she wants to take a second to unmute and relay it, that's cool. Rita, you said you were comfortable with that, so go ahead and fire away. I'm going to scroll through the chat for another question or two.
Hi there, this is Rita, and you actually started on it, and the question was, so we need that balance between due care by making people follow our policies, and we have to have sanctions when you don't follow it, to this whole concept of democracy of technology, which I love that term. So like you said, we don't want to be Dr. No, right? Even though that's what they call us. And we have to show our metrics. So run our internal phishing, and then they mess it up and they have to come to us and say, forgive me for I have sinned, which only racks up the hatred level for us. So where do we go to find that balance so that they have the freedom for that democracy that you're talking about, but at the same time, we can say, here is our demarc line. Here is where we are safe. We have a place where we can huddle and hide for a second. And we know that here's our security posturing when you walk into our perimeter.
Mm-hmm. I have had, so that is, it is such a relevant area. And I really believe that that is the art. Where I've had success is by making it a risk conversation. Instead of making it a you done bad or you done good conversation, to make it a risk conversation and tune it to the level that you're speaking at. A concrete example here, the one thing that my organization keeps and manages is for every report to the CEO at HP, we maintain a dashboard for that pillar. At the company I am at, And this is where audience-driven communications is so key, and the ability to read the room is really key. If I rolled into a CEO staff and I showed that dashboard and I gamified it, it would not go well, just because of the personalities, some politics, some history, some various things. Everyone would be more focused on trying to look better than someone else than they would think about their own area. And I know that. At another company, I think you could do that and it would be productive. But I know in my company, it ain't going to work. So what we do instead is on a quarterly basis, I meet with these individuals one-on-one. So they don't feel shamed and they don't feel embarrassed. And I make the conversation about risk. And I just say, look, if this continues, this is the impact that you're potentially going to see. How does that sound to you? And on some days they go, yeah, I'm cool with that. No worries. And on some days they go, oh crap, what do we do about it? So if you make it about risk, more about you done good or you done bad, personally, I've had a lot of success with that. But that's why I say it's an art, because that's harder. It's harder to do that than to just roll out metrics to everybody and go, hey, look at this, do something about it. All right, I got real work to do. I'm out of here.
Yeah, thanks. I have, so what I'm going to do is there was another comment. I'm going to paraphrase into a question. Thank you, Rita. And there's some more comments. There are a lot of people that seem to want to engage in conversation. And just maybe as a final question here, I'm going to take something that came from who made a comment about leadership buy-in. And hopefully, I'm not going to do a disservice by paraphrasing, but how do you take some of the things you're talking about, or in your experience, how do you communicate up, right? So you've listened to this keynote, you've learned something, and now you want to do something with it. But because of where you work and what you do, you're going to have to communicate this up. How do you do that successfully? And what would you advise a person who wants to take it and do it to communicate this up? What do you think about that?
Two things come to my mind. It's a little bit unstructured, so I'm going to think out loud for a minute. One is, in any situation, in my experience, the best chance of success is to understand what motivates the person you're talking to. So if you know, let's say you want to take something that you learn at BSides, it may be from my keynote, maybe from somebody else. You want to take something back, and the right person to take it to is 2 hierarchy levels up from you. Do you know how that person is incentivized and what motivates them? Because if you know that, you've got a massive leg up on, not only will they be willing to listen to you, but fundamentally people are self-motivated. If you can explain to me what you want in a way that benefits me, I'm all over it, right? That's just human nature. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. So if you're able to tie that to something they are incentivized by, beautiful. Another thing is, if you want to take something to somebody that you don't think they're going to like, and you think they're not going to like this answer. I got a really good piece of advice one time, ironically from a terrible leader, but this was great advice. He said, never give an executive only one choice. If they tell you to do something and you know it's the wrong thing, don't say, well, you need to do this instead. Bring them back 2 rocks, bring them back 3 rocks, and structure your rocks in a way where they can reach the right answer without losing face and without looking bad. There may be a way to kind of take those 2 ideas and